it's always been a love of mine to sort of do tracks that are like maybe slightly too short for some people. Like I definitely did that on the Walrus EP, which is like my first ever release, because I just like the idea of like a short story that brings someone in, and then they get to the end and they're like, wait, what? And they have to put it on again because there's stuff there that they felt that they missed.
This is Producer Pioneers. It's presented by Classic Album Sundays in collaboration with Resident Advisor. A huge thank you to Danley Sound Labs, to Audio Technica, and of course to Colour Factory as well for hosting. So my name is Tina Edwards. I'm really excited to be hosting this tonight. It's been a great series so far. My very special guest released her debut album Yellow in 2021 called Yellow on her very own label called Movementt. She's a talented band leader, trumpeter, multi-instrumentalist and producer. She's fresh from touring, just got back from Japan, which sounds pretty amazing, and has been given Album of the Year from the Jazz FM Awards. So please show your love for Emma-Jean Thackray.
Thanks so much, guys.
Sweet, where to begin? Let's just dive straight in. What drew you to production?
I think it was always that I wanted to go beyond the notes. So the things that I listened to as a teenager and would then like figure out how to play on the guitar or the keyboard, that's how I learned to play those instruments essentially. I play like, but why doesn't it sound like this? Why doesn't it give me that feeling? Why am I not getting butterflies playing on the guitar when I'm like listening to the CD? And that's when I sort of realized that there's something more going on. And the more I started writing music, and then took that into, doing it at music colleges and writing my own stuff and trying to get other people to play the music, it was always like even more so trying to go beyond the notes. So people would play something and I'd be like, okay, I just need you to do this, or I just need to do that. And they would always be like, but I'm playing the notes right, why are you still not happy? And it was just always a continual progression of realizing that there's so much more to the music than the notes and the performance and the way it's recorded. It's like all these things together make up the production, and that's kind of how I was always thinking of music, but didn't realize that until later on in life.
It's like the missing elements to create the sound that you wanted, perhaps.
Yeah, or the combinations. Like maybe you've got all the parts, but it's just the way that you put it together is what's special about it.
Nice. Are you naturally technically minded, or did you have to kind of get yourself into a certain sort of mind state to get into production?
I am if it's a special interest. I think it's one of those things where if you gave me a manual to figure out a washing machine, I'd tell you to fuck off. But if it was if it's like a special interest and I happen to be really specially interested in a certain kind of washing machine, then I will sit and I'll figure it out and I'll know every tiny bit about it. So for me, technologically figuring out music and how to make music, how to record it is not a struggle in any way. It's like because I'm just so excited to figure stuff out. But the whole aspect of like rewiring the back of the studio and like doing all that stuff, to me it's like, because I'm not making music, I just check out and get someone else to do it for me.
I like that. So I wonder sort of if there is a preferred DAW or I guess program. I've picked up the term DAW, but I don't know how accessible a term it is. Do you even use the term DAW? Does it float around producers? I sort of read about it in context, but I don't really know quite what it means.
So it's like what you make your music on, essentially. And I think I tend not to answer that question usually, because I think people are coming with preconceived ideas of what they think I'm doing on certain things. Like there's just, as with lots of things in life, like the sort of the subcategories of everything have got so much meaning behind it. So if you go, oh yeah, I use this one, people will think that you do a certain kind of a thing. So just like when a trumpet player, like, oh hey man, like what mouthpiece is that? I'd be like, fuck off, doesn't matter. Like if someone's like, oh, are you using Logic 10? I'm like, doesn't matter. It's like, just use your tools. But not that I'm saying fuck off to you in any way, I never would. But yeah, I'm using Logic 10 at the minute. But I used 9 for so long. And I had like this old computer that I think I was like 10 or 12 years old when it finally conked out, and that's what I made Yellow on, like 4 gigs of RAM, old, you know, sort of gone system that's like, you know, you can't even open up your emails because it'll just crash. And I was just thinking, just one more project, I can get one more project out of it. And then as soon as I sent off the pre-masters for Yellow, it never turned on again. And I was like, thank you. You've really, you've lived your life now.
That's great. It really did conk at the perfect time. Good.
It just held on for me.
Good. That's so lucky. Amazing. So tell me how long you've been doing production. Like, tell me the first moment that you sort of thought, okay, I'm going to get my head into this, to the present day. Has it been a long time, or is it relatively new for you?
It's been a long time, yeah. I think unofficially it was like when I was like 13, 14, when I started writing music. I was making like these MIDI songs and like beats and stuff on this like old, I think we had like Windows 98 or something, and I was using these different score programs and then putting it into Cubase, I think, and like making these little MIDI beats. And I was essentially doing what I'm doing now, but just with worse equipment, and just like, I would make recreations of things. Like I'd listen to songs that I liked, things like, I was really into Dream Theater as a very strange teenager, and I'd like transcribe everything and write it all out and be like, try and make it sound as much like the record as I could using these like MIDI programs. And so I think it's essentially how I've always been making music. It's not just about writing it, it's about changing the sound of it rather than just writing the dots on the page.
Nice. And when you were that teenager, you know, referring to Dream Theater and all that kind of stuff, did you have friends that were producing music as well, or were curious in the same ways? Or were you kind of doing this quite independently as a teenager?
Completely independently. Like we had a music tech course at my high school, but it was like self-taught because we didn't actually have a teacher or any lesson time for it. It's just a case of like a couple of the music kids that wanted to do it were allowed to do it. So there was a couple of other people doing it, but they were just doing it because they wanted to like do more music and not go to maths or whatever. So, but for me, I was like doing all these different arrangements and like trying to record things and like trying to learn how to use the big desk that the school had, and like not knowing what I was doing at the time, but just like trying stuff out and experimenting. And then going home and doing stuff, and again just like being on my own, and it being very self-led and a very organic way of learning, like just through breaking stuff or not, and then being like, okay, that worked, that didn't break, and just just being quite innocent the way I was sort of navigating everything.
And I bet that was quite important in a formulative sense, to sort of have the confidence to just poke around, make those mistakes, learn by doing, essentially. Because basically what I'm hearing is it was quite mostly independent, really, in terms of you didn't have a mentor or someone guiding you or an older sibling who was producing that showed you what to do. It was like you were very self-driven and self-taught in the way you were doing it. Did you ever hit any roadblocks that you had to sort of, I don't know, problem solve around, or any moments where you thought, screw this, it's not for me? Or did you always find it quite easy to push through and figure things out for yourself?
I think, it's not easy, but I think I always wanted to figure stuff out, and if there was something I wasn't sure how to do, I would find a way to make it happen. I never sort of thought like I've come to a point where I'm no longer interested in it. It was like a very specific special interest that I had that no one else had, and in some ways that was really sad because I couldn't share it with other people. I had no one, like you said, showing me what to do or showing me which way to go. But in some ways it sort of made me more resilient and more eager to do it on my own, because I was like, there's no one else here, it's just you making these weird beats at age 14. It's like you just got to do it, and if no one understands, then that's their problem.
Awesome. So I'm sure inspirations will have driven that time. We've mentioned Dream Theater. Was there anyone else that sort of inspired you to start working within Cubase and go through this production journey?
I got into dance music really early, like about 14. That's when I started going clubbing, essentially.
Wow. And you grew up in Yorkshire as well. Like,
yeah.
What was that landscape like as a 14-year-old clubbing in Yorkshire?
Cold. You're not allowed to wear a coat. Everyone will look down on you if you go out in a coat.
It's like the northern rule. If you go out up north, I swear, like you go out in your best garms, and the jackets and coats stay home.
Exactly. Yeah. It's almost like if you on Monday when you're talking about your weekend, it's like, man, I almost got hypothermia. Everyone's like, oh, what a great weekend. Well, that's when I started going out and like really hearing music in a different way, like the big sound systems, hearing like remixes, hearing different sort of contextualized versions of songs that I thought I knew. And there was like a massive wave of, what was it called when I was like 16 or so? Dirty electro or dirty funky electro, which is essentially just house with like obnoxiously loud sawtooth bass lines. But I was obsessed with it. I was, shades on, like just there, going out in Leeds, just being an absolute dickhead. But, I think it's helped with what I'm doing, hearing stuff on the speakers, if nothing else, has really helped with my ears forming and, learning stuff.
Nice. And I'm probably getting a little bit ahead of myself, and tell me if it's too soon to ask about it, but you've got a UK thing coming up, which is sort of you interpreting, correct me if I'm wrong, but sort of 90s classics in your own way. I wonder if that takes you back to that time a little bit, that project.
Exactly what I want to do it for as well. Like, 90s, noughties kind of stuff of... dance music that has made the UK and made it this celebrated place, but also that has made me, and just tunes that I love. I wanted to... I always find performing fun, but I wanted to find it fun in a new way and sort of have that nostalgia of like, it's not my music I'm playing. It is in the sense that I'm like reinterpreting stuff and there's like my arrangements, but it's not my songs. I can just sort of be on stage and just perform in a completely different way. I don't have to be trying to embody what I want to convey through some lyrics of a certain song and being, I have to get back to that place if I'm going to sing this song. It's just like, there's no acting involved in that. It's just like, I fucking love this tune. Let's just have some fun and show that like, jazz musicians grew up listening to that and turned into this.
Oh, yes. Yes. Let's bring it to the present day then. I've asked you a lot about your teenage years and getting into production, but let's talk a little bit more about the modern day, about Yellow. We're going to be playing some tracks from that and from the Movementt EP as well very soon. But first of all, the thing I wanted to ask you about, which I guess is very specific, is sort of going back through your discography from the last few years, and a lot of your tracks, not loads, but a few of them earlier on would have been around 7, 8, 9 minutes. With Yellow, you've got this beautifully cohesive album with tracks that are, I guess, friendlier to radio because they're all a little bit shorter, that 3-4 minute sort of mark, some a bit longer. I wonder if you had to sort of, I don't know, if it presented different challenges trying to condense your ideas into shorter tracks. And maybe it wasn't even on purpose, maybe that just happened. But does that kind of create different challenges for you as a producer?
Yeah, I think it's... for me, it's always been a love of mine to sort of do tracks that are like maybe slightly too short for some people. Like I definitely did that on the Walrus EP, which is like my first ever release, because I just like the idea of like a short story that brings someone in, and then they get to the end and they're like, wait, what? And they have to put it on again because there's stuff there that they felt that they missed. And in Yellow, it's not that I thought, okay, I have to do something more radio friendly. I think if that had sort of been told from the start that, okay, you need to do something, we need to try and go for a playlist here, there'd be a big middle finger going to everyone that told me to do that, because it's more about like, it's about the art, and so you got to do what you feel. But I think it's just been really organically, it just happened like that. And in a way, I've really liked it because it means that then when I rearrange stuff and take it out on the road and we do live versions, I can change it up so much. And I've been doing that throughout this whole touring campaign. It's like some songs have gone through like 3 different versions because every few months I've changed it, like to keep us interested, to keep audience that are like returning interested, and just to show that like the music is always evolving, like trying to treat things like original jazz standards of like everyone doing their own version. It's like, well, I'm doing all these different versions of my own tunes and then doing remixes, and then maybe we'll do a live version of the remix, and then maybe that will change, and it's just going to keep spiraling and just open up and become its own musical world when we're on tour, that started from this like seed that's on the record that's like 3 minutes long but turns into this 10-minute long version when we're on stage.
Awesome. And I've loved seeing how your live show has evolved as well. Like, I remember at Love Supreme and We Out Here, you do Venus, and then you have this little breakdown and you come back with the dance version, remix sort of version. And it just sounds so great live, where you have this kind of, it's like maybe 10, 12 minutes of Venus joy, but every section still feels fresh and new, and like you're just hearing something brand new all the way through. So I love hearing how the tracks evolve from the record. We'll go into listening to a couple of tracks from Yellow really soon, but I wonder if just generally, if you could kind of lead us in into any sort of production inspiration you had for the record going into it.
I was listening to a lot of music from the 60s and 70s, and particularly things like Pet Sounds, I think, is one of my favourite records. And there's this production technique in it called the wall of sound, which is where Brian Wilson would just like layer things up so much that things would have its own sonic qualities that you wouldn't have heard before, because it wasn't like, oh, these are trombones, because these trombones were then layered with a choir that was layered with a siren that was layered with something else, and it sounds otherworldly and just so different. And I wanted to try and capture that on this record. Like, there's just all these different layers and songs where it's like things are hopefully should sound a little bit strange, because you can't sort of readily identify every sound because it's just layered and so many things are happening. And in terms of the way I mixed it as well, I wanted it to sound like you were hearing music from that time, like 60s and 70s. So there's not a lot of sub bass. It's very in the middle, and I wanted it to sound like you were listening through some wooden speakers, like in a living room, sat down, if that's what you want to do, like with a cup of tea, or just hearing it in a specific way is how I approached all the sound world.
Brilliant. All right, cool. Well, let's start to go through a few of the tracks from the record. And then after that, we're going to listen to 3 tracks that you have selected as well that are just particularly interesting or significant in your production journey, or maybe they're just sort of inspiring you or interesting you at the moment. The first one we're going to check out is, I'm sure, a track that you've all heard, which is Say Something from Yellow. And let's bring this needle down.
Show us your mind.
Thank you. Banger. How does it feel hearing your own stuff back? I guess you maybe don't, it doesn't happen often, or maybe it happens all the time. I can't really gauge it.
It doesn't happen at all. Like, I don't necessarily like sit and put on the record. I do when I'm working on it, and then when I feel like it's done, I sort of feel like I can let it go and it doesn't belong to me anymore. So it's it's quite nice hearing it after so long, because I'm just kind of like, I forgot I did that bit, or
Right, all the little tiny details that I guess you can hear. I feel like that track is kind of quietly cosmic in a sense. I don't know if that sort of translates with what you had in mind when you were producing that, but they're kind of like gentle swooshes and little things that I can sort of pick up that just feel sparkly and cosmic, and maybe that's a bit of a throwaway word, but it just makes me think of that kind of aesthetic. Can you put me in sort of the mindset of where you were when you were producing this track?
Yeah, I mean, it all starts from like penning it down on paper. That's like when I'm first producing it, because I'm sort of hearing everything in my head like straight away, pretty much.
Maybe not the finished thing.
Yeah, maybe not all the little details, but I can hear the overall architecture of the song like immediately, and it's like, okay, now I have to get to that point. What do I need to do to make that happen? So and of course there are like compromises you've got to make along the way, but I try and do whatever I can to make that original vision happen. So when we were recording it, I sort of had some challenges, and in the way that things had happened. So like recording the drums and the keys and stuff, we were at this studio in Margate that had sort of been lent to me for a few days, and it turned out like a couple of it was already an 8-track desk, and 2 of the tracks weren't working, and I didn't know that before I turned up, so I had to then like change my my plan of like how I was going to record the drums, and I had to go from like, I never liked lots of mics on the drums anyway, but I had to go from thinking that I was at least going to have like a snare mic to knowing, okay, I don't have a channel for that anymore, so just doing like 1 kick and then 2 overheads, but then having to lean into that and be like, actually, maybe that'll be good because I can get more of that sort of like open sound. I can capture the room. I can try and capture the overall performance a bit more than I can like each individual sound. It's not going to sound that clean and crisp, but I can lean into that and find something else magical to bring out. Same with the keys. Like there was like a weird crackliness, and I was like, well, I'll just put a little bit of distortion on it anyway, because that's kind of the sound I wanted. So it's just like having to make all these compromises that in the end actually are probably good things and what makes things stand out, or is kind of what you wanted anyway, but just not necessarily the way you wanted to do it. And then everything else was either recorded at my studio, or a couple of things were recorded at what used to be known as Soup and is now Lightship, which is on a boat in East London. And just trying to layer stuff up and trying to make it seem like one live performance of everyone was quite difficult. But that was my overall sort of aim, to make it sound like you are sat in a room and the band is there with you. So even the way I panned everything, I wanted it to sound like, okay, the keys is going to be over there in the mix because I want you to be imagining the keys player sat there, or the drums are going to be over there because I want you to imagine them being sat over there. So just trying to be consistent as well throughout the whole record as well, like where things are panned, so that you could listen to the whole record and be sat in the same chair in this imaginary room listening to this orchestra playing, essentially.
Nice. And what was your team like that you were working with in that scenario? Or was it just yourself sort of leading it?
Mostly it was just me, and then when I was at Lightship, we were recording like some brass and some strings. I had their engineer as well helping me, because it's not my studio, so I can't just go tinkering with stuff. But mostly I record everything myself, mostly. Just, if I'm in a bigger studio, I leave it up to the person that owns a studio.
Sweet. Awesome. Well, let's check out one more track that is much loved from Yellow. Let me check I've got this on the right side. I'm sure I do. Oh, yes, please.
There's a spectre in my house. He walks right through me. There's a spectre in my house, but he walks right through me. He walks right through me.
Sweet. So, where did you start on Spectre? Was this a bit like Say Something, where you sort of heard it in mind first and then had to get it down, or was it different?
Kind of. I sort of had the fragment of like the main hook of like da 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 da. I sort of had that in my mind, and I sat at I don't think it was the piano. I think it was like, I've got this like a Hohner pianette, which is sort of somewhere between a Rhodes and a clav. It's like a very weird sounding keyboard, and I just sat and I just like basically played the whole thing and wrote it in real time, and was just like, okay, that one's done. It was really strange. It just sort of like flowed out of me, because it's about, everyone's best friend, depression, and whether it's mine or like my loved ones, and like whether it's about feeling about like my own illnesses, or like having to be around witnessing the illnesses of someone I love and not being able to help, and just feeling like it's just like this thickness that's always there that just won't fucking go away. It's sort of, I had a lot to say about it, and it just sort of came out. And like, I didn't write all the words immediately in that time when I wrote the song. I had a few bits where I'd written the words, and a few bits where there's a couple of little gaps, and I just had the la la la's or something written in. But yeah, it just flowed out, and then it was about trying to think about how everything was going to sound, rather than, I knew it wasn't just going to be me at a piano. There was so much more in my head. There's like this huge soundscape. So it was about trying to figure out how I was going to do that, and I sort of was basically hearing an orchestra in my mind, but didn't have the budget or the time or the space in the studio to do it. So I had to sort of pretend and try and record things either individually or in very small groups, and then layer them up in order to make what I made. So I started with that bass of like the drums, and then like the bass playing that sort of that crotchet, that relentless crotchet that goes throughout the whole tune. And then I doubled that with a guitar that was like, had a really sort of subtle slapback kind of sound, like quite 60s. And then there's like a Rhodes, and then I really wanted there to be like this almost like, I can't remember how I described it before. I think it was like a haunting gospel kind of sound that I was trying to get with the backing vocals, and like there's only 3 string players on that, but it sounds like 30, I hope, because I just layered it so many times and had different mics on them and had different reverbs that were being layered up as well. So it should hopefully sound quite otherworldly, where, at times like maybe unnatural as well. Just sort of quite consuming, and there's like this organ as well that's like got this panning on it that's just sort of doing that. So it should hopefully, if you're listening with headphones, it should be doing this and like feel maybe a little bit nauseating, like, oh God, what's happening? Which is exactly how I want you to feel. By the end, I want you to feel depressed. That's what I want. I want you to be so consumed with mental illness that you just can't go on. That's what I want.
I could definitely hear like the haunting gospel sort of element of what you described. I think that's the perfect phrase for it. I can imagine this is one of the more time-consuming tracks to have put together. Is that right?
Mixing it was a fucking nightmare. It was, trying to find space for everything was really tricky. But in the end, I just sort of, rather than trying to like be so precious about everything, I'm like, okay, well, that frequency is then interrupting this one, and I've got to notch that out, and I've got to do, rather than getting so precious, just kind of doing it ish, and then just being like, actually, maybe a couple of frequencies rubbing on each other is actually going to give quite a good effect afterwards, of like things sounding a little bit whirly and a little bit kind of strange.
Interesting. Very cool. Well, let's check out a little something from a different release of yours. I think the next one we're going to go to is from the Rain Dance vinyl called Movementt. Do you want to maybe introduce this track while I switch the records over?
Sure, yeah. So Movementt is essentially the sort of like head track of like my label Movementt. So it's got this mantra running through it of like move the body, move the mind, move the soul. And I've tried to like distill my ethos into like a track, which sounds crazy, but it's like it's essentially like a housey kind of thing with all these different jazz elements, and like I'm playing it all myself, and as I do with quite a lot of the records, it's like if not a couple of band members in there, I'm basically doing everything else. But on this, it's just me, and sort of how I started making music was just like just me in my studio, and just sort of no one else to think about, just satisfying my own whims, and it was really fun to do, and I think it's the track of mine that's done the best in terms of like streaming and stuff, which is really interesting to sort
awesome.
of figure out what it is that people in different parts of the world like.
I love that.
Thanks.
Sweet. So that came out in 2020, didn't it? Only a couple of years ago. I mean, I guess almost 3. But would you say your production style or anything has changed in that time since you produced that track to now?
I've definitely got better equipment, which can help massively. I don't think equipment means everything by any means. I think you can make something great with, like, a sort of Walkman and a crap mic. I think you can make worlds with like almost no stuff. But I think for what I'm trying to do, like the big sounds that I'm trying to sort of create, I think I definitely, at the very least, needed a little bit more RAM on my computer. So, I mean, I think the ethos is still the same of like the balance of like trying to balance groove with something a little bit more cerebral, trying to bring a message of something nourishing for the soul. I think my ethos is still the same. It's just different tracks inhabit different worlds and come from different influences.
Nice. And how do you think those influences have changed? Because I imagine, you know, the things that you've been influenced by a few years ago, you might still be now. Do you have sort of fresher influences that have come into your life more recently that are sort of having an impact on how you produce?
I don't think so. I don't really listen to much music actually anymore, which sounds counterproductive as a musician and a producer. But it's for me, like listening to music takes so much energy, because if I'm hearing it, I'm like seeing the score in my mind. I'm picking apart not just the notes, but like how it was recorded, how it's mixed, all these different things, that it's so draining to like sit and like listen to something. So it takes a long time, like putting together a DJ set or like a radio show or something for me takes so long, because like I just find it knackering to listen to like a couple of songs. So I actually don't think I'm really listening to anything new at the minute. I think I've not really had the mental capacity to do that for a while, especially since I've been touring. I've just been so zapped and wanting to stay within my comfort zone of stuff that I have already picked apart, and I'm listening to for pleasure rather than to learn. I will get there again eventually. I've got, some recuperating and some work to do to get to that point again, and I will get there again, but I've not been there for like, I'd say, at least a year. I've not been in that point where I've wanted to hear anything new, actually.
I guess energy is a currency, isn't it? And it's like when you're spending a lot of energy in one place, it's hard to spend that same currency somewhere else without getting overdrawn. If I'm not taking this metaphor too far, but
bank come for it.
The bailiffs are knocking. But yeah, I can understand that completely. We've got one more track of yours to check out before we go to 3 that you've selected for us to listen to by other artists. That's going to be coming from this little gizmo over here. So we're going to be checking out the open remix featuring Blue.
Just before we move on to that, I just want to say one little thing about Movementt, because I accidentally came across a thread about it on Reddit, and I thought it was hilarious. It was in like some like jazz part of Reddit, and then like someone had posted this track, I think with intention of like, oh, this is good, I think, I like it, what do you think? And some people were like, some people being really nice, some people being really mean, as is normal. But one thing that one guy said that really tickled me was like, to paraphrase, it was like, what is this? It's just basically some jazz samples over some EDM beats, like this is shit or whatever. And then someone else was like, no, she plays everything herself. And then they were having like this big argument about whether I actually played the trumpet or whether I was like taking samples from the internet. And I just thought it was really funny. So
I feel like the information is easily accessible if they wanted to check that.
And I remember asking some people online, I was like, should I join in? And then I was like, nah, just let them talk amongst themselves.
I love that. Yes, thank you for sharing. Let's check out the open remix featuring Blue.
Are you open to reality or open to imagine things, fantasies, ecstasy, euphoric elopement, utopia? Will you let me open you to show you the powers I possess? For hours I'll confess and open up to you by showing love to you.
Thank you.
Yeah, give it up for the open remix. Sweet. Tell me what it's like to work with Blue on that, to collaborate.
Wonderful, easy, great. Like, sent along the track with the spaces for him to have his verses, and then like not so long later he sent back a bunch of stuff and was like, there you go. And that's exactly what I like doing. Like, that's how I like to work if I'm doing like a feature with someone as well. It's like, I don't need to come to your gaff. Like, you send me the stuff, I'll do my thing and I'll send it back to you. I want to do it in my own time, in my own space. He's the same over in, I think he's in LA. If not, he's in California. And yeah, it was just perfect. It's just nice and easy, just like everything you could want.
Brilliant.
Yeah. The opposite of what it's like stereotypically working with rappers.
Yeah. Yeah, because I imagine there's a lot of people that will always sort of argue for, oh, you want to be in each other's space, you want to have those moments, together beforehand. But actually, I guess what you're waving the flag for is having those quieter moments where you can get deep in your creative self and like take that creative offer, or he receives that creative offer and can really immerse themselves. And there's a lot to be said for that as well, for sure.
It was also like made during like the lockdowns and stuff. So like I couldn't have like flown over to him to do it. So in a way, like the nature of the world at the time facilitated this like great way of working together of like email, which, we've had for so long, but I think people haven't really realized just how much you can get done in it until the past couple of years. Like, it's like, oh yeah, we don't need to be in this place every day necessarily. Like all these parts of it that I think have been underutilized are, we're now appreciating it more.
Absolutely. So did you guys kind of talk beforehand creatively about what you wanted to do, or is it purely that you would create something and go, surprise, see what you want to do with this?
I mean, I think my choruses are there of like, I'm open, which are the words, were there on it. So he heard the words, and that's all I wanted to give him. Just like, that's all he needs. Like, he can interpret that how he wants, but I think he's going to do it in the way that I want him to anyway, because he's a very conscious person, and the stuff that he usually raps about is, intelligent and considered and very open-minded. So I knew that he was going to, look onto what I was saying, and I didn't need to give any prompts. It was
nice.
Awesome.
And you've done quite a few remixes now, Black Science Orchestra, Strata, loads more. Some amazing stuff. What's it like to work on a remix versus a production from fresh?
I think it's about... It's a different mentality for me, because if it's my song or it's my my track, whatever, it's about getting my vision down, and it's about no one else can tell me what to do with that. It's like, it's very specific, and I'm quite stubborn in what I want to make happen. If I'm remixing for someone, it's different, because it's about their vision, it's about what they've made, and then it's about reinterpreting that. So, of course, there's creative license, because they've come to you because they like what you do. They want to see you interpret the work, but you're starting from a place of like, this is their seed. So you're growing it yourself, and in your little pot of soil, and trying to make it do a certain thing, but the type of flower that it is already made. Like, they've already given you the seed, so you've got to work within their framework of what they've given you. But it's for me, it's like, I've done some remixes that are like, okay, this is like for the club, or this is for that. I've done one remix where I sort of did the opposite, where it was for Rosie Lowe, and like I could just hear this like funk, kind of like P-funk kind of vibe, and I was like, I'm just gonna like completely flip this and not make it for the club, and like make it seem like funny and weird and like very P-funk kind of that universe. And she was like, yeah, great, do what you want, do you, that's why I've asked you. So yeah, I think remixes can be so many different things, but it's just about recontextualizing a song and just showing people a different side of it.
Nice. I think you've touched on something really interesting there, because you've brought up, P-funk, jazz is a thing, club culture is a part of your tapestry as well. There's so many different styles, and I'm not asking a question about genre, but I wonder if there is something cohesive about your production values that enables you to kind of go off in so many different directions. Is there that sort of one thing or sort of an approach that you think ties these very different sort of vibes together?
I think there's a few, so like having this commitment to groove of like, even if something is quite free sounding, there's probably going to be a groove there. Like the Talking Therapy record I did recently, it's like, it's very free jazz and very kind of raucous, but there's always a groove, or so that groove element is across everything. It's just about how it's contextualized, like, is it more for the club, or is it more hip hop, like the Open Remix or something? But I think it's just this. There are like a few calling cards that are very me, that you can hear on lots of things, and P-funk, I think, is something that's definitely inspired that. So like the way I approach vocals is very, not necessarily in the way I do it, but in the results is like very P-funk. Like I try and make it sound like there's almost like a gang in the studio with you, like, and there just happens to be a microphone, and it's all like a little bit silly, and there's like all these different characters there. So it's like I'll record things either too fast or too slow, if I'm doing like a spoken thing, to try and get the timbres of like these different voices, like people of different sexes or, you know, different kind of vocal qualities. And it's that's something that I do on basically every track. If I'm doing the vocals on it, which I almost entirely am, that I'll be doing that. So it's like recording techniques to make it sound like one person is 100 people, or however many people I want it to sound like. And that's a good tip that everyone can use. It's like recording at different speeds. Even if you don't want it to sound like lots of people, you just want it to sound like one person, but not necessarily you. You can fuck with the speeds of how you're recording it in to make it sound a bit lower, a bit higher, whatever you want to do to try and bring a different feel. And I like to do that in like lots of layers and have like backing vocals of people like maybe just being silly, or like I think there's like some laughs in some songs where I've like kept it in because it makes it sound like there's people in the room. It sounds organic, it sounds very live, which is something else that I think is a calling card. Like everything should sound live to me. Like I never record on the grid, I never record like things perfectly in tune. In fact, sometimes I like, you know, will purposefully slightly detune stuff to make it sound a little bit kind of strange, bring out some different colours, make it sound a bit more organic. So yeah, groove, weird voices, and making it sound live. I think they're my calling cards no matter where I'm pulling the inspiration from.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for describing that for us, because I think that's probably quite a personal thing as a producer to try and share, you know, what it is that makes you in a sense. And those are three of many things for sure. But yeah, thank you for sharing. So we've had 4 of your tracks. Which one of those 4 has been the biggest labour of love, do you think?
All of them, in their own special way.
Fair dues. We won't make you pick. Let's move on to some tracks that you have picked out for whatever reason they may be. And we haven't actually discussed the reasons yet, which I'm really excited to find out along with everybody else. The first one I'm going to play is from Noname and Phoelix, I think it's pronounced, with song 31.
Truth be told, I wear my heart on my sleeve. Watch you set it on the shelf, now my body got cold. I swore I would never leave. Had to do it for myself to find my prayers. I go get your ass back inside.
Real recognize, real feeling like real proof. Real buddy after the trip to the Cancun. $1 million baby, bet you can get to the hands too. Got a pack of wolves ready to damage a full moon.
That is a lovely Noname, Phoelix, song 31. Tell me the significance behind that selection.
It's fucking sick. It's so good. Phoelix is awesome. I mean, I'm a big fan of Noname, and I think she's a fantastic poet and rapper. But what's really special about that track for me is what Phoelix is doing. So he's her producer, and I'm not 100% sure that he's playing everything, but I'm pretty sure it's him playing everything. And he's a multi-instrumentalist, and he plays everything on his own stuff as well. He's got great solo stuff as well if you want to check it out. Phoelix, spelled Phoelix. And he's just great. And the way he's approached that beat is kind of similar to the way I approach the open beat as well, where it's like a couple of things that are just like repeated loops happening, and then a few elements that are more organic and like played live throughout to make it seem like it's not a loop. So he's got like that vocal kind of loop happening, those chords that keep coming back and back and back, and then everything else is like played live to it. And yeah, it's just really magical, like the way the drums are recorded, like so open but really meaty at the bottom, and it's just like exactly how I like to approach playing music live with other people as well, where you've got this core idea and then you can be playful around it. You don't have to stick to it exactly, and he's done that with himself, which is great.
Yes, I know what you mean. The way you describe that reminds me of Knowledge as well, with Anderson .Paak and No Worries, and just how you get these 4-bar loops that are so simple, but the whole song just migrates and changes and shifts throughout with these really small changes. How often do you sort of go to wanting to make loops for yourself? It's something that pops up maybe now and then, but I imagine it's not that common for you?
No, not so much. It depends on what I'm trying to do. I mean, like on Yellow, there's no loops apart from like riffs that keep coming back, but they're not looped. They're just like played again and again to make it, you know, the time will do this, and that's exactly what I want it to do. So yeah, it just depends on the kind of thing that I'm doing. I mean, in Open, for example, like I'm sampling, like there's some drums like I'm doing with Dougal who play drums with me, He's like done something, and then I've taken it home and chopped it up, and like that is a static thing. Like the length of that sample won't change if I keep repeating it, but like where the beat is within it is where like the wave comes, and then what I'm doing around it with all the other instruments is where that wave comes. So I tend not to do loops so much, but when you're sampling, you know, you're taking a piece of something, and you can't like then retroactively do it again in like a different length or a different key or something. You've got to be that change. You've got to sort of put your will and impart that on the sample and make it do something else if that's what you need.
Nice, awesome. All right, let's check out your next selection. It's a very short and sweet one. It's Erykah's Gun from DJ Harrison. And it ends very abruptly, as I'm reminded. Cool. So that's the short and sweet Erykah's Gun from DJ Harrison. Incredibly warm, and you feel like you can almost kind of like dive into it and cuddle into it in a way. Tell me why you picked that one.
Again, it's like a loop thing where every time it comes back, it's just something so subtly different, and it's just so perfect. And I'm a massive DJ Harrison fan. Like again, he's like, you know, he's playing everything, and like, you know, big respect to multi-instrumentalists doing their thing on their own. And it captures like what I love about Jay Dilla, and like how when I really got into producing was like being inspired by people like Madlib and Jay Dilla, because like there's this loop where you don't immediately know everything that's going on because it's so complex, there's so much happening, and it comes back and one tiny thing has changed. Maybe it's just like there's like a kick that becomes like a little double kick, or just something very subtle, but it just keeps you going, it keeps you guessing, it keeps you in this loop where the essentially like what is like one thing happening, you can have it on loop for like an hour and like never get tired of it. And I think that's probably what I did when I first heard that. I think the first thing I heard from DJ Harrison, where my partner was playing it, and I sort of like angrily was like, you need to put that on again because it was so good. And yeah, I think it's great, and I think it ends abruptly so you can loop it. I think that's why he's done that from like one of the beat tapes that he's made. I think it's like from 7 years ago or something. And yeah, it just reminded me of why I sort of like really fell in love with production. Just these little subtle changes that just, yeah, that's all you need.
Nice. When did you start listening to DJ Harrison stuff? Was it when your partner first played it? Was that the first time you heard?
I think it was, yeah. And like, I've just sort of, yeah, been with him ever since. Like his recent album, Autos from I forgot what it's called exactly. I don't want to say it and get it wrong, but his recent album is fantastic. And like, I was just over in America and like watching Nate Smith like with DJ Harrison at the side of the stage, which was like great. Just being like, I fuck with your shit, man. That's great. Let's watch Nate Smith and like have a good time, and just get to say hi and just tell him that I just love his stuff. It's like, yeah, that felt good.
Amazing. You must be getting to meet quite a lot of people whose music you admire yourself, being out on the road in the States and Japan and stuff. Is that happening sort of more and more? Sometimes.
I'm very antisocial. So I tend not to say hello too much. I kind of have to be forced a little bit to like, go say hello. And I'm like, I don't want to. Just so, yeah, I'm a little bit shy.
Sweet. Hey, fair dues. When the moment's right, yeah, I'm sure you take it. Sweet, we got one more to check out that you have selected for us. This is Pad Kontrol. It is Georgia and Muldrow and Declaime. What's the significance behind this selection for you?
Georgia and Muldrow is one of my favourite producers of all time. I think she's fantastic, and I think I can't remember when it was, but when I first sort of heard her music, I remember seeing like this video of her in the studio, and she was making beats, and she had like loads of stuff around her, like little xylophones, just little like fun things to play with, and she had like a baby like on her lap, and was just like making beats, and I was like, I want that to be my life. Like that is just incredible, and it was really inspiring then to just like watch her just like grow and keep growing and doing all these amazing things. And she's a really unique sounding producer. Like, I don't know anyone else's music that sounds like hers, and everything is like so bassy and weighty, and she's not a jazz musician, but she's really inspired by jazz, and you can hear her like pulling from that harmony without pretending to be a jazz musician. It's just like something that she likes and likes the sound qualities of, that she's very happy to like use and make her own. And she said in an interview once that like everything that she does is late. It's like, if she's going to be somewhere, she'll be late. If she's going to play something, she'll play it late, or like, and I just found that really like fun to think about, because like if everything is late, there's nothing in, it's not in relation to something. So how can everything sound late? Because there's nothing for it to be late from. Yeah. So I thought that was really strange to think about in terms of like her music, because it's like, you know, it could be that like the kick is here, but then everything else is behind and like a little bit late, but it doesn't sound like that. It just sounds like everything is like warm, and it's got this like wave to it. Like she's just like on her own time, and I love that, because I hate things that are quantized or like on the grid or perfectly in tune. I hate all that stuff. I want to hear the human, and I think her music sounds so human, even though a lot of it isn't real instruments. Like it's like she's made a drum kit on like her computer or whatever she's doing, and or she's pulled from a sample or something, and it's like, you know, they're not like, she's not in her room like playing the drums necessarily, but it still sounds so human and so real, and I just think she's a genius.
Well said. I wonder if there's anything in particular that really attracts you to a certain producer. I mean, you sort of talked about this human element, but what is it that makes you go, this producer's sick, or I love their style, I love what they're doing? Is there anything in particular that you really look for?
I think the initial reaction for me is like, if I don't immediately understand what's going on, that's like a real pull for me. Just because of the way that I can like hear and process music very quickly. Is like, usually I listen to something and I know exactly what's going on. And I'm like, okay, I know the chord, I know the key, I know what's going on, and I can like see the score in my head. But if it's something where it's like, I don't know how you did that, that is like really interesting and like pulls me in and makes me want to like pick it apart and like find out how you did that. And it's like going back to like full circle, like going beyond the notes of like, it's not just like someone on a piano like playing that. It's like there's something else, there's some other element, which might be just like the way that you've summed up all the parts and put them together. But it's just like, yeah, something beyond the notes where you're telling me something that I don't immediately hear or don't immediately understand. It's like, that's the kind of stuff I want to listen to and be inspired by.
Sweet. I'm going to hand over to you guys in a couple of minutes, but first of all, I wonder if you could just share with us basically some advice. So, you know, Producer Pioneers is very much about inspiring the next generation, for those here and for those listening back as well. I wonder if you could give your advice on, just any general advice on production, as both someone who is yet to enter but is thinking about getting their head around production and what it is and wanting to get creative. And also your advice for someone who is a producer now and how they might take themselves to the next steps.
I think for people who are like getting into it or want to get into it, is like, don't be scared by getting like fancy gear, because you can make your debut album on like a 10-year-old computer with like 4 gigs of RAM and like a crack copy of Logic that I did not own and had downloaded. It's all legit now, don't worry guys. But you know, you can do so much with so little. So if you do want to invest in something, invest in like a decent interface. Like there's some really good ones that you can get for just a couple of £100, and you don't need a good mic. I think even sort of like what you would think of being like a cheap, crappy mic nowadays is pretty good. Or just get like something like, you know, SM58, just something like that, where it's like you don't need to be spending thousands of pounds on gear. It's just, you don't need that these days. There's so much available. Or, you know, there are loads of places where it's like you can go and just like use stuff. Like someone else has got some gear and you just want to go try it out. There are some things like, if you just give it a Google, there's lots of stuff like in London. So yeah, don't be afraid about gear. You don't need shit. As long as you've got ideas, you don't need anything. A lot of my instruments are bought from like markets, and they're like broken and still broken. My trumpet is like, it bends down. It's like, it's broken. It's just make. If you've got good ideas, you'll make stuff that you find interesting. And for people who are already doing it and want to take it to the next level, I would say listen to your stuff on lots of different kinds of systems and in lots of different situations. So you might be using, like, maybe you've got some good speakers, maybe you've got some good headphones, or whatever it is you're using, take it to somewhere else. So go listen in like someone's car. And if it's like how you want to sound in a car, that's really great, because cars have got really good sound systems. Listen to it on like, send it to your phone and listen to your phone speakers. Listen on your laptop speakers. Listen, I don't know, just like in all the different contexts that you can, because like there'll be something in there that you maybe didn't hear on one system. Like if you're always listening on a good system, you'll miss out on what people are usually listening to it as, which is like through a phone or something. And if you're only listening through your phone, you'll miss out on that experience of hearing it in more high fidelity. So just try lots of different ways of listening to it, give it to different people. There are lots of meetups you can do where you can like play your stuff and like hear it in a room, like through big speakers, and have people be like, oh yeah, that's great. What if you just do this? Or, you know, there's lots of people there that want the community as well. It's like, you don't have to be on your own. Be on your own if that's what you want, but you don't have to be. There's loads of other people making music in the same boat that want to hear and help and have you hear and be helped as well.
Amazing. I'm sure that's very inspiring to a lot of people, so thank you for sharing that. I'd love to open it up to you guys. If anybody has any questions for Emma-Jean Thackray, this is such a rare and unique opportunity to have a little bit of one-to-one time with Emma-Jean. So if anybody's got any questions, here we go.
Hi, can you hear me? Yep. Thanks so much for the talk. It's absolutely fascinating. How many instruments do you actually play?
I don't know. My main instruments are like trumpet and singing, and then everything else is like secondary to that. So yeah, all the rhythm section stuff, like loads of brass instruments. But I'm one of those people where it's like, if you give me a few minutes and an instrument, I'll figure out how to play it. It's they're all based on the same rules essentially. So like on ley lines, like Catford Bridge, I think it's called, where I'm like doing this like bass clarinet thing. I basically like had never played the clarinet before until 10 minutes before I made that. I just happened to borrow one from like a music Saturday school, and like, you know, all instruments are the same essentially. You either blow them or you hit them. You waggle your fingers.
You blow them or you hit them.
I'm not saying I'm good at the clarinet. I'm a bad clarinetist. And actually, someone that I know sort of was really angry at me for doing that. Was like, how dare you do that? I've been playing the clarinet my whole life and trying to be really good, and like, I think it sucks that you just like thought that you could pick up a clarinet. Like, that's really insulting. And I was like, is it? I mean, I felt like I was like being playful and just wanted to give something a go. So I don't know is the answer.
That's a great answer. I mean, not being intimidated by just wanting to pick up different things and play, and sort of trusting in yourself that you can figure out how to work your way through it. I think it's great. I'd like to take that inspiration into my own life, I think. Do we have any other questions? Shoot away.
Thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing. I wanted to ask you a bit about playing with other people. You've got a band. I know you've been a band leader. And I don't know if it's kind of something about, obviously, the pandemic, having to probably spend more time on your own. But tell me a bit about playing with other people, your core band, and how you interact with them.
Well, I love playing with other people. I know I mentioned before, but I'm very antisocial and don't like to go outside. But I do love other people. I just have to do it sparingly to maintain my energy. Yeah, I love it. I mean, as a jazz musician, it's all about interacting with other people and being creative in the moment, which is for me brings so much fruit when it's with other people. So the way that I bring my music to them is, in a sense, maybe it's different to other people, but I like to take it to them knowing that at the beginning I want them to play exactly how I want, and then we can evolve. So they'll have like a bass line and some chords and like a general groove and some general sections. But within those sections and those sort of like hit points of where things need to happen in a certain way, we can do anything. So it's very different to when I'm recording, which is like very set and you need to do exactly what I need to serve this vision that I have in my mind. But live, it's much more open and there's much more creative license, and it's a little bit more democratic in the way that we can play, where someone says like, oh, what about this? And it's like, on a record, absolutely not. It has to be what I want. On stage, absolutely, let's give it a go and see what happens. So, yeah. It's my life
jazz, which
yeah, that's what I do. Yeah, it's it's important to play with people, but I think as well there's so much to be said for doing stuff on your own and taking time to maybe try and do something that's just your brainchild is really satisfying as well.
Nice question. We might have time for one more if anybody else has a burning question to ask while they have the opportunity. Great jacket, by the way.
Thank you very much. Do you know very much about music theory? And what would you say to someone who finds it intimidating? Or do you think it's useful? Or how does it affect your production?
Yeah, I know quite a lot about music theory. I sort of studied at conservatoires and have studied both like jazz and classical music on like an academic level. And knowing that I know a lot about music theory, I can say that you also don't need to know about music theory, and it's fine. Even when I was like studying my bachelor's, which was like a jazz degree in jazz trumpet, there was someone in my ear that couldn't read or write music, and that's fine because he had a great ear. As long as you're led by your ear and you can sort of hear what the rules need to be in certain aspects through your ear, you don't necessarily need to know how to write it down or describe stuff in a certain way. So musicians that I work with even now don't read music, but can like figure out crazy stuff and hear. And it's just about that, they've trained their ear so much that they don't need to know what a chord is called or anything like that. I think it's just, for me, knowing about the theory is just like, it's like language, It's like just a different way to explain to someone what you want to happen. So if I write down on a piece of paper the parts for a song and we're going to go record it, it's just quicker for me to do that than explain it or play it to them. But, it could be, my drummer doesn't read music. I have to like sing it to him or play it to him and be like, okay, yeah, it's this and it's fine. It just depends on what you want to do. I think if you have the time to learn just a couple of little things, I think that's always beneficial. It's always great to know a little bit of theory because it does help in some certain situations, but it doesn't help in every situation. So don't feel like you need to or you're not a real musician if someone thinks that because they don't know this bit of theory. Like, it's all bullshit. It's just, if you've got the ear and you're creative, that's what matters, essentially. It's like that creativity and following your ear, knowing what sounds right to you, that's everything. The theory is just something that can help. You don't necessarily need it.
Great question. Yes. I don't know if we have time for any more, but we might be able to squeeze any in if anybody does. Yeah. Dive in.
Hi there. I was just thinking, as a jazz artist, you really stand apart from a lot of the other acts, like kind of from your space, from your generation. Like seeing you live, it's like going to a house night sometimes. The energy is just through the roof, and it's really unique and really special. How do you bring that to life? Like, what makes you? Like, have you been to loads of house nights or into house music? Like, what is it that brings that to life? Because it's really quite special, and every time, like I've seen you live, it's just that every time it's different and it's fresh and it's really captivating.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I think it's just like not being scared to play what I want rather than what I think people want. I think people hear the word jazz, they think it's usually a certain thing, which is why I tend not to use that word anymore. Not because I'm scared of it or don't want to use it, but just because I think what I'm doing is drawing from so many other places, like dance music as well. So it's just about doing, in the nicest way possible, whatever the fuck I want and not thinking about the consequences.
Yes, loud for the people at the back. I interrupted your flow. I just needed to give that some noise.
Yeah. I mean, the house stuff, I mean, I did definitely go to a lot of house nights, particularly when I was younger. Now I'm antisocial and old and don't only go to a few. But yeah, I was a youth, always out and no stranger to the Mitsubishis.
Brilliant. Guys, it's been such a pleasure. Please join me in putting your hands together and showing your appreciation for Emma-Jean Thackray.
Thanks so much, everyone. Cheers.